Good morning, everybody. My name is LB. Any pronouns work for me. And today I have the honor of leading worship with Robyn Salvin. She and her pronouns work for Robyn. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Wendy Bartell. Please use my name rather than pronouns. And along with Reverend Lynn Gardner, she, they pronouns, we serve as the co-ministers of this congregation. It has been a horrifying week in a series of horrifying months. In this particular horrifying week, agents of the state have been empowered to wreak havoc and visit violence upon people in our nation. As our UU colleague, the Reverend Abi Janamachi, said, there are no words that can make this make sense. And yet silence is not an option. Grief, when it is honest, becomes clarity, he said. And from that clarity, we act, not because we are driven by hate, but because silence would make us complicit. And so we speak the truth. We are experiencing the efforts of domination, trying to intimidate us all into submission. This is authoritarianism. Many of us in this circle in our lives are struggling with what to do, struggling with our very big feelings. Please don't suffer alone. I and others perhaps will be available over at the fireplace on the name tag side of the room, the welcome table side of the room, for a brief time if you'd like a place to start processing your feelings in conversation with one another, or to receive a hug or a blessing for the week ahead. Unitarian Universalists have resisted oppression for centuries. We must resist in any small or large way that we can, while we still can. If you want to do something today, you might consider, after getting a warm beverage and visiting the tables in the back, or helping with a few wreaths, is to bundle up and head downtown to the New York State Lottery Building at 1 Broadway here in Schenectady. Noon to 2 p.m. Indivisible will be there. You can bring signs, drums, or just your compassionate heart, and bear witness or raise your voice. We cannot let this cruelty go unchallenged. If you want something to do in the coming weeks, the music team is hosting a Sing Out for Peace and Justice event on the 25th from 1 to 3:30 that helps us keep our human dignity and our sense of being human intact. We must keep love at the center, not fear. May our fire of commitment melt their ice-cold hearts. Kindling that flame, however literal or metaphorical, is our faithful duty.
What is considered brave and courageous can definitely be interpreted differently by different people. But here are 5 small acts of what I consider to be brave or courageous that I've witnessed just in the last week. 1. My daughter Lily showed up for jury duty. She is 20, and this was her first time being called to participate in this civic obligation. Now, listen, she didn't really have an option not to go for a number of reasons. 1, she already postponed once. 2, her mother is a government teacher who preaches civic participation on the daily. 3, there's that pesky potential fine and jail time if you fail to show up. But it's a nerve-wracking experience with a lot of unknowns. So I saw it as brave for her to go and figure it out. 2, I'm obviously not going to get into details here, but I've been inspired by the courage of students and friends who have decided to reach out for help amid struggles with their mental health in the last week. For one person, the decision to return to therapy was upon the recognition that if she didn't finally get professional help to deal with a past emotionally abusive relationship with a family member, she was never going to begin the healing process. For another, it was accepting help from a teacher following a mental health crisis. The decision to attend to our mental and emotional health can be really scary, and it's really brave. 3, I love me some Jeopardy! My family watched it nightly when I was in high school. My dad, being under the impression that the louder he yelled his answer at the TV, the more right it was. And now I watch with my family whenever I can. In fact, I clocked my official membership in the Old People Club last year when Dan and I went out to dinner at like 5:30 on a Friday night to avoid the rush, you see. And as we were pulling into our driveway afterwards, I actually uttered the following sentence. Oh, good, we're home in time for Jeopardy! R.I.P. Robyn's youth. Anyway, well, this week, Jeopardy's host, Ken Jennings, made news when he posted on social media, quote, the prosecute the former regime at every level candidate has my vote in 2028. That's right. Ken Jennings is part of the resistance. Who knew? Mr. Jennings didn't have to post that. He didn't have to disclose his moral objections to this administration. Jeopardy is an institution with devotees of all political stripes. He had to know what he was doing was going to alienate some of his viewers with that comment. But that didn't stop him. His online response to some of the negative reactions to his comment and other reposts of the condemnation of the killing of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent was, I've been a blocking and a muting all afternoon. Good on you, Ken. 4, my sister Renee scheduled her hip replacement surgery this week. She's 54. Her doctor informed her last month that she'd likely need to do this in the near future, and the other day she got it on the calendar for March 17th. As it is for anyone, this will be a major disruption for her. She's a hairstylist who's on her feet all day. She won't be able to work for 3 to 6 weeks, and her family has been experiencing some disruptions in their health insurance lately. So there are a lot of considerations in making this decision beyond alleviating physical pain. I know it was a difficult decision for her, but I'm so glad she had the courage to do it. 5, and while I wouldn't put a lot of politicians in the brave category these days, I've got to give a shout out to Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis. Within an hour of the killing of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, in her big stupid hat, attempted to gaslight all of us into thinking that Good was a domestic terrorist who tried to run over the ICE agent with her vehicle, justifying the shooting as self-defense, despite the fact that those of us with the gift of sight were able to see quite clearly that that wasn't the case. Mayor Frey responded with his own press conference where he called out the lie and quite explicitly told ICE to, quote, get the F out of Minneapolis. The force with which this was said was impressive, and it was equally matched by the ASL interpreter who signed the sentence. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It is incredibly satisfying. When confronted with a journalist's question about whether he was contributing to the tension by using inflammatory comments, Mayor Frey said, I dropped an F-bomb. They killed somebody. Which one of those is more inflammatory? I'm going with the killing somebody. At a time when all the terrible things are happening, most of which are happening because of heartless, deadly, and unconstitutional decisions by our federal government, it is refreshing to see the bravery of those in power who, despite their other faults, are willing to publicly and energetically fight back against this regime. More importantly, are the thousands and thousands of people who have been offering community care, marching in cities all over the country, chanting, drumming, singing, to keep our humanity intact. 1 week from the perspective of one person. Recognizing these little acts of bravery or courage is inspiring. What small examples of bravery will you identify this week? What courage might we find in ourselves this week?
This morning's service started with an excerpt from a much longer conversation between Toni Morrison, Frank McCourt, and Juan Williams in 2001. It took place at the Connecticut Forum in Hartford as a part of a Black History Month celebration. Juan Williams asked both Toni Morrison and Frank McCourt, how do you survive whole in a world where we're all victims of something? And Toni Morrison replies, sometimes you don't survive whole, you just survive in part. But the grandeur of life is the attempt. It's not about that solution. It is about you being known as fearless as one can and behaving as beautifully as one can under completely impossible circumstances. It's that makes it elegant. Good is just more interesting, more complex, more demanding. Evil is silly. It may be horrible, but it's at the same time, it's not a compelling idea. It's predictable. It needs a tuxedo. It needs a headline. It needs blood. It needs fingernails. It needs all that costume in order to get anybody's attention. But the opposite, which is survival, blossoming, endurance, those things are just more compelling intellectually, if not spiritually. And they certainly are spiritually. This is a more fascinating job. We are already born. We are going to die. So you have to do something interesting that you respect in between. Last week during the ritual service, there was a meditation shared from the Reverend Victoria Safford. 2 words from that meditation have been bouncing around in my brain and in my heart all week. The excerpt containing the 2 key words that have been preoccupying me all week goes like this. Quote, here's what cruelty taught me something. Here's where cruelty taught me something. And here's where I was first astonished by gratuitous compassion and knew it for the miracle it was, the requirement it was. It was a trembling time. Can anyone guess which 2 words have been following me around all week? Which ones? Yeah, that's it. I'm probably not the only one who's been thinking about that all week. Yes, gratuitous compassion. Those 2 words feel really good to say out loud, particularly in times like this. So I'm going to say them one more time. Gratuitous compassion. Yeah, let's say it together. Thank you for that. Gratuitous compassion. Yeah. And what a week it has been, as Robyn said, the silliness of evil that Toni tells us, Toni Morrison, and the predictability of the horribleness of it, the need for blood and fingernails was on full display in Minneapolis. That need for blood, unfortunately, so available to us in social media and constant news coverage. Simultaneously, we are fortunate to have it available to us so that we can witness truth for ourselves and not allow the government cover-up to go unchecked. And still, gratuitous compassion was a steady drumbeat. In that Toni Morrison quote, she said, survival, blossoming, endurance is a more fascinating job. Evidence of this endurance has been equally on display in Minneapolis, with Renee Good's neighbors videoing the entire scene so that we have evidence of the monstrosity of ICE, turning on a camera, pushing a play button, those small moments of action leading to big moments of courage that we all can participate in. Choosing gratuitous compassion over evil is a brave choice, one that Renee's wife, Becca Good, shared in her statement to Minneapolis Public Radio yesterday. It's a much longer statement. I suggest looking it up. But one of the lines she shared with us was, on Wednesday, January 7th, we stopped to support our neighbors. We had whistles. They had guns. In Minneapolis this week, neighbors and citizens bravely showed up with whistles in the face of guns. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is. Everyday people are taking to the streets with signs and pots and pans, small things against those big weapons. And sometimes courage looks like doing things rooted in compassionate, in gratuitous compassion when faced with completely impossible circumstances. And sometimes courage shows up in unexpected places. This past Tuesday, I attended the funeral of the mother of a good friend of mine. The funeral itself was beautiful. The music was great. The tributes to my friend's mom were touching, funny, and full of love and adoration for a woman who lived and loved well. And yet, there were moments when we had to witness our friend make a brave choice to stay in gratuitous compassion for his mother, even at the expense of his own dignity. My friend is transgender and lives openly and proudly as a trans man. And while he attended that church as a teenager, and many knew him in his younger life, he has been out as a gay trans man for well over a decade. He only uses he and him pronouns, and he has a husband. And still, during this funeral service, many in the church misgendered him and used his old name. And for those of us who are his friends and were there, many of us trans and gender nonconforming ourselves, we felt every uttering of some of the smallest words in our language, she and her, land on him like big, heavy sacks. But looking at him and watching him stand to honor his mother and the community that gathered to honor her life, you would never know. He bravely chose gratuitous compassion for his mother and those that loved her and those that loved him because of his mother. And it is not a choice that everyone would or could make, but for him to stand there and not react to being misgendered was the right choice for him. As his friend, watching him keep his heart open through the loss of his mom and a loving community struggling to affirm him was something to witness. To me, my friend was a good example of what Alok said earlier. Feed your contradictions. Consistency is a property of objects, not lives. The Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention was founded in 2017 to fill a gap in the global prevention protocols and provide advocacy that is responsive, flexible, transparent and judicious, nonpartisan and vocal. The Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention believes that peoples in crisis need immediate action and direct support, even when the international community has its head in the sand. 5 days ago, the Lemkin Institute issued a warning from genocide scholars that the United States is in early stages of genocide against trans Americans. Experts, including 2 former presidents of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, warn that the nation, our nation, may already be in the early stages of committing genocide. Quote, I am concerned about genocide against trans people in the United States in the near future, said Dr. Henry Therault, who served as IAGS president from 2017 to 21. Dr. Gregory Stanton, a former IAGS president who serves now as founder and president of the group Genocide Watch, said the attacks on transgender and non-binary people in the U.S. represent a quote-unquote genocidal attempt to destroy a gender group. I think what they're doing here is they're trying to destroy a gender group, he added. And so I do think it's genocidal. I think that the objective here is literally, physically, to destroy this group. Now, I don't bring it up to scare us all, but genocide is a big word. It's made of big, horrific acts of violence. And when we think of genocide, we think of what we have learned through history and seen more recently in social media. The Holocaust, Sudan, Gaza, Syria. But genocide does not appear out of nowhere. The big atrocities require much smaller forms of dehumanization, discrimination, and bias. It is the accumulation of smaller actions, both at the individual and governmental level, that allow the big, capital V violence to be normalized. On this slide is something called the Pyramid of Hate. And I know for many folks it's probably difficult to see, so I'm going to read it. This Pyramid of Hate was created by the Anti-Defamation League a couple decades ago, and they've been using it in Holocaust education, and those of us in equity work use it often to demonstrate lots of other forms of violence and bias. But what you can see on this slide, or if you can't see it, I'll read it to you. The biggest foundation on the bottom of the slide is bias. Forms of bias look like stereotyping, belittling jokes, insensitive remarks, non-inclusive language, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, and accepting negative information while screening out positive information about a different group of people. Those smaller acts of bias are the foundation to which individual acts of prejudice happen. And individual acts of prejudice look like bullying, ridicule, name calling, social avoidance, slurs, epithets, and dehumanization. On top of that, and individual acts of violence, then come discrimination, economic discrimination, employment discrimination, educational discrimination, political, housing discrimination, and segregation. On top of that comes bias motivated violence, individual, like murder, rape, assault, threats, and community based violence, like arson, terrorism, vandalism, and desecration. And on the tippy top of this pyramid of hate, the smallest piece of this triangle is genocide. And genocide is the act or intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire people. And while genocide happens less often, it is fundamentally standing on the foundation of all of these other forms of violence. And the frequency to which these kinds of violence happen are more frequent at the bottom. You cannot reach acts of genocide without a very strong foundation of the everyday little acts of bias that happen that is so normalized in our culture for trans people, for people of color, for women, for immigrants. At the bottom of this pyramid is the foundation and where the small is. It helps us come to understand how small acts of bias against transgender people feed to the layer above and the layer above that all the way to the top. The top of the pyramid cannot stand if the bottom is weak. That is why the basis for genocide requires a robust and active amount of everyday small acts of bias. For larger acts of violence to take place, it needs many, 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 many more acts of small bias to feed and support it. And while this can be depressing and hard to wrap our heads around, the reality is that we have so much more power and control than we think we do. What if we replace the bottom of this pyramid with gratuitous compassion? Small acts of compassion and kindness, of bravery, that don't allow the accumulation of violence to occur in the first place. Things like honoring people's pronouns, their chosen name, or a quick apology when using the wrong one, and then correct ourselves or someone else gently. Googling stuff instead of asking the same people over and over to explain a topic or a point to you when we can Google things. We have Google. It's great. There's a lot of terrible things on the internet, but it is great. Other things like educating ourselves about the lives of trans people using sources like the UA Common Read from last year, Authentic Selves, celebrating trans and non-binary people and their families, gratuitous compassion and kindness in action. But it's not just about learning about trans people that's going to undo the foundation of this pyramid that's leading to genocide. And I say it actively, leading to genocide. We not only have to learn about trans people, we have to actively undo our understanding of gender and the way that it was taught to us in problematic ways. Things like believing that there are only two genders, that gender is biological, something we are inherently born with, and that men and women are inherently different from each other. There are many, many ways for us to challenge our understanding of gender overall, not just reading a book about trans people. The less we rely on gender stereotypes about everybody, the more affirming an environment will be for trans people. The next slide is called the Pyramid of Love. That feels better, doesn't it? The Pyramid of Love was created in 2021 by Christian Sarker and Philip Kotler. Christian Sarker is an author, entrepreneur, artist, and social innovator. He is a co-founder with Enrico Foglia and Philip Kotler of the Regenerative Marketing Institute, a research and advisory institution dedicated to post-COVID community development and renewal. including the Regeneration Journal, an online resource for regenerative practices. And while the pyramid of hate helps us understand the connection points between small acts of bias all the way up to genocide, the pyramid of love is one example of how we can escalate peace and justice and undo and counterbalance the pyramid of hate. This one is also difficult to read from far away, even from where I'm standing. So I'm going to read it for us. At the bottom of the pyramid of love is impartial attitudes, acknowledging the individual, respectful remarks, celebration of differences, inclusive language, micro solidarity. What that would look like is even when there are no trans people around, we talk about trans people, right? If we're talking about gender at work, we're not just talking about men and women. We say, oh yeah, and trans people. That's micro solidarity. It's not enough to to only be in solidarity when there's trans people in the room, but when we're not in the room. Tolerance and dignity, questioning biases by seeking out diverse views and people, questioning negative information or misinformation, and seeking common ground, even when we disagree. On top of that, impartial attitudes is acts of goodwill, friendliness, empathy, appreciation, recognition, benevolence, social inclusion, respect, uplifting, humor, and jokes, right? We're not joyless, as Alok told us earlier about laughter. It is required in this. We also have to uplift humor and jokes as part of our escalation of peace and justice. Inclusion, economic inclusion, political inclusion, educational, employment, social, housing, integration, digital inclusion, criminal justice, equity. On top of that is justice, life, dignity, safety, non-aggression, non-violence, courtesy, fairness, truthfulness. And at top is peace, the act or intent to extend kindness and compassion. And I would add safety and the affirmation of the right to be to all people, cultures, and nature. At the bottom of the pyramid of love is changing our attitudes and belief systems and seeking common ground. At the base of any pyramid that centers love is gratuitous compassion. Because, as Toni Morrison reminds us, the grandeur of life is the attempt. It's not about the solution. It is about you being fearless as one can and behaving as beautifully as one can under completely impossible circumstances. It's that makes it elegant. Good is just more interesting, more complex, and more demanding. And this is what makes our UU values so compelling and crucial as a guidepost for this moment. The values of generosity, transformation, equity, pluralism, interdependence, and justice compel us to translate all of these into action. And if our everyday behaviors are rooted in these values, the accumulation becomes gratuitous compassion of a pyramid of justice and peace and love. And dare I say, a world without genocide for anybody. But that new pyramid is not just for trans people. Preventing a genocide on trans people is intertwined with the prevention of genocide for anyone that doesn't fit the narrow box of gender or race or immigration status or belief systems or bodies. I'm going to say all that again. Preventing a genocide on trans people is intertwined with the prevention of genocide for anyone that doesn't fit the narrow box of gender, race, immigration status, belief systems, bodies, religions, etc., etc., etc. For when they come for one of us, they come for all of us. Let us all find bravery and courage in the everyday moments that undermine the foundation that hate and violence needs to survive. And may we stay connected and never stop believing in the possibility of a future that puts love and gratuitous compassion at the center.